So thanks for showing up, everyone. I'm still out here in Massachusetts, teaching at the Forest Refuge for the month of December. So a little bit of a different setting for me, but glad that the Tuesday night groups can continue. So let's settle in, do what we need to do to feel at home in our body at this time. Almost as if we're willing to grow roots into the present moment, this embodied experience. Allowing whatever feeling that's here, allowing it to move, allowing whatever's moving to touch the sensitive heart, undefended, exposed to all that's moving now in the body and the mind. And it's an exploration, like, is it actually safe for me at this time, in this moment, to be undefended? We just explore that, dropping away of defense, of armor, softening, opening. Maybe even accessing this compassionate, tender response, as if we were in some way holding ourselves, whispering in our ear, "Honey, it's okay to relax. It's okay to put down the load. It's okay to be at ease now." So don't be shy about actually trying that, checking that out. Learning how to abide, to rest in the sense of being open and allowing. And perhaps tonight we can explore, as we did recently, the just opening, allowing, hearing, the experience of hearing to be what it is. So just tuning in to the sensitivity to sound. Whether it's specific sounds in our space or the ambient sounds in the room. And we're just exploring, being open, not in any conflict with the sounds that we're hearing. You might even notice that sense of, that simple or subtle sense of release, not having to fix the sounds or change them in any way. And recognizing this even more subtle truth that hearing these sounds is being known. So with the emphasis on is being known, or being heard. Notice what that does. When I realize, for example, when I realize hearing is being known, it helps to undermine the sense that the sounds are out there. It makes it more clear that the hearing is right here, right at the heart, right in the mind. Hearing is here and now, right here and now. Right in the middle. Whatever it is we're knowing thoughts, knowing bodily sensations, knowing sights, or knowing sounds, where is the knowing? The knowing is here, here and now. It's the heart and mind that knows and feels, and the heart and mind is right here. Not there, out there. So as we continue to reflect on the experience of hearing as the primary meditation object, letting it become the predominant experience that's being known. Hearing is being known. And see if you can keep in mind this is being known, that aspect of the experience of hearing, that it's being known here and now. Really trust this receptive, open sensitivity to hearing. Hearing is being known. And of course, any judgment or reactivity around the sounds that are being heard, or any liking of the sounds that are being heard. So any of those kinds of mental or emotional responses to sounds, that's just that mental activity being known. So see if you can recognize that even though the hearing, the experience of hearing being known might be our predominant or primary meditation object, other experiences will arise, and we can practice recognizing that that's an experience being known. And again, with the emphasis on being known, that it's something being known here and now. And some of you might even find it useful to repeat that phrase from time to time in the mind, is being known. And you can name whatever it is in that moment that's predominant. Hearing is being known, or thinking is being known. Doubt is being known. So whatever it is that arises, the stream of sounds being heard or the stream of sensations being felt, sights being seen, thoughts being known, so in this way, no matter what it is that shows up, we practice recognizing the simple truth that it's this experience being known. Again, with the emphasis on is being known. No matter how personal the experience might be, like if we have some doubt show up, or we're starting to feel bored. Boredom is being known. It's an experience of body and mind being known or felt here and now. So we'll continue in silence. Just do the best you can with these instructions. Let that be good enough. So we're not in any way trying to control or fix what unfolds in our experience. If some painful memory were to arise, or an exciting thought, or whatever it might be, the practice is to understand it as something being known here and now. And this isn't in any way being dismissive of our experience, it's just a way to be closer, more intimate with the way it is. All of our profound, sublime experiences are something being known. All of the ordinary and mundane experience is also just something being known. And the relevant question is, can we relate to experience in this deep way, as something being known, something being felt moment by moment? And now for just the last minute or so, once again clarifying this capacity we have in practice to be interested in the knowing. So recognizing whatever experience naturally is predominant moment by moment, we're learning that we can keep in mind that it's being known. It's an experience being known. And you can move through the 6 sense gates, just seeing that whatever experience of sound that we're sensitive to right now, that hearing, that experience of hearing is being known. So we notice that it's being known. And whatever visual experience, whether the eyes are open or closed, that visual experience is being known. It's subtle, but we can recognize that it's being known. Same with smelling and tasting, to whatever degree that's active now in the moment, that is being known. Feeling sensations, all of this sensitivity to touch is being known here and now. And all the different mental activities, emotions, mental images, all of that experience being known. So when you're ready, take some time, if you'd like, to stretch or move a little. Open the eyes if they've been closed. And once again, it's really nice to be with everyone. Thanks for showing up tonight. I understand for those of you in Minnesota, a lot is happening. As I mentioned at the beginning, in case you missed it, Wynn and I are here at Barre, Massachusetts at the Forest Refuge where I'm teaching for the month of December. And I just moved by hearing the sad news of our immigrant neighbors in Minneapolis being targeted, and it's got to be a frightening time. And just appreciating personally just the sense of helplessness in some ways, and so much moving in our country and in our world, and just that truth of how ignorance leads to, these expressions of greed and hate and activities that cause so much suffering, and how these cycles of suffering, these experiences of suffering just seem to perpetuate themselves over and over and over again. So I've become really attuned to not wanting to be part of these repeated cycles, and really doing my best to develop some humility and sensitivity to how I can be complicit. And I think our practice really helps us in this way. As the Buddha said, it's like our not understanding suffering is the cause of suffering. So in a way, our response to our own suffering, our response to other people's suffering, sets in motion suffering, more suffering. And it's not like an answer, but what it does is that statement or that teaching, it really points us to get interested in how do I relate to suffering, my own, the suffering around me. Am I afraid of it? Do I turn away from it, want to be in denial or distract myself? And what does that set in motion in my heart and in our world? Some of you know there's a very potent teaching from the Buddhist tradition called sometimes the transcendental dependent origination. But as a teacher, the Buddha had two pretty big challenges. Somebody wanting, like the Buddha, wanting to articulate the experience, his experience of awakening, so that it might be useful for other people, right? That became his responsibility when he decided he was going to teach. And so what he needed to map out, what he needed to articulate, you could dice this or talk about this in different ways, but one way to talk about it is he had to map out or articulate how our seemingly very personal experience of suffering can be understood as a natural process. And then he also had to articulate and map out, in a way that would be helpful for others, how the experience of awakening is also a natural and personal process, right? Both spinning in cycles of suffering where, me suffering leads to me suffering, which leads to me suffering, and then, of course, contributing to the suffering of other people, because we affect each other, right? So how can that, to me, feel so personal, like when my heart hurts, when I feel helpless, or when I feel ashamed, or when I feel defensive, or when I feel angry, all those ways that we experience this heaviness, this tightness in our bodies, in our heart and mind, how that is a natural, impersonal process. Like it can be understood in this conditional way, like when there's this, there will be that. With the arising of this, there's going to be the arising of that. But without this, there's not going to be that. And without the arising of this, there won't be the arising of that. That's a way we understand, like something that arises lawfully or conditionally, through that ordinary basic process of cause and effect. So awakening, the liberation, the unshakable release, the sure heart's release, that's just a natural process. And when the appropriate supporting causes are there, then the letting go of suffering, the releasing from suffering, from all that burdens and weighs down our heart, falls away. And when the supporting causes aren't there, the liberating process doesn't unfold. And the same thing with suffering. When the supporting causes are there, we continue to experience the heaviness, the squeeze, the deadness, the numbness, all the different ways we experience dukkha, suffering. This teaching on transcendent origination, there's a very famous section of the text that describes this that I really love. Just as practitioners, when rain pours down in thick droplets on a mountaintop, the water flows down along the slope and fills the cleft, the gullies, the creeks. These being full, fills up the pools. These being full, fill up the lakes. These being full, fill up the streams. These being full, fill up the rivers. And these being full, fill up the great ocean. So too, with suffering as the proximate cause, faith comes to be. With faith as the proximate cause, gladness. With gladness as the proximate cause, rapture. With rapture as the proximate cause, tranquility. With tranquility as the proximate cause, happiness. With happiness as the proximate cause, concentration. With concentration as the proximate cause, the knowledge and vision of things as they really are. And with dispassion as a proximate cause, liberation. So there's just this natural cause and effect, this natural process. And interestingly, with this, the Buddha is talking about that faith or confidence is a link that allows us to transform our experience of suffering. And the Buddha was really clear about this. He said, when we experience suffering, that heaviness of the heart, we do one of two things. We either beat our breasts and lament and scream and blame and react, in ways that just perpetuate the experience of suffering for ourselves and others, or we undertake a search. Like, what is this experience of suffering? And that's a powerful turning point, because there's always something that's off in our experience, Even when we're having a really nice experience, we want it to last. So in that sense, even nice experiences, there's something we feel obliged that we have to do, like fix this or make it last, or how to lock it in, how to own it in a way that it will never go away. So there's always some stress involved. We always feel when we're having experience, all life long, moment by moment, we always feel that there's something for me to do. There's something for me to fix. There's something for me to manage. There's something for me to hold on to. Right? So there's, in our ordinary way of relating, which is the cause for dukkha, there's an inherent restlessness in that. And our practice, which has the basic flavor of freedom, right? It has this taste of freedom, even our mundane practice, when we first learn it, right? Because instead of me opening to my breath or me opening to my experience of my body sitting, or like we did tonight, opening to the experience of hearing, we're on purpose not trying to fix, not trying to hold on, not trying to manage. We're trying to relate, like in tonight's meditation, we're trying to relate to hearing by letting it reveal itself, right? We're trying to open to it, let it reveal itself. So this understanding, it's an experience being known. So it's really, the approach is this wholesome desire to want to understand, right? So it comes from this humility. And that's that turning point that this teaching on transcendent dependent origination, how the awakening, how the liberation process unfolds naturally as a natural process, right? It starts with a very ordinary, unavoidable, in a sense, experience of dukkha, of suffering. But instead of suffering being the cause for more suffering, a reaction of some kind, suffering is the cause for faith or confidence. So see if you know this experience. I'm guessing some of you will recognize this, where you have maybe not, don't look at some of those more overwhelming experiences of suffering that you've had in your life, but just ordinary unpleasantness, ordinary moments of stress or, feeling mental strain. And instead of reacting to it, there was an interest. And this is why it's good to get the teaching like one way it's described in our tradition. I don't know who first coined this phrase, but it's, I think, a useful phrase. And it goes like this: pain is inevitable. Like, as long as we're alive, as long as we have a mind and body, pain is inevitable. It's unavoidable in human existence, right? So far, so good. We all agree with that, probably. But the second half of the phrase is, but suffering is optional. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And the point of a little teaching like that is to challenge ourselves. Like, so when we do experience the pain of loss or physical pain, we bump our head, stub our toe, or we feel the pain, the anguish of seeing people being mistreated, not treated humanely. And just that sort of empathy and that feeling of helplessness and not wanting things to be the way that they are, right? So we have, that's painful and that's inevitable. But how I relate to that pain, what I do with that pain, that's practice. And we can explore it directly, like ways that we relate to those places in our lives where pain shows up, inevitably, unavoidably, and we can learn. Like the way I'm relating to pain is adding more pain and suffering, is adding this second arrow, as we know from that very useful little teaching about, the Buddha talks about the second arrow. When we experience pain, our very deep habit is to shoot a second arrow. You know, we're always going to be stabbed with darts and arrows and poked and prodded, and our sensitive heart is going to feel what it feels like to be a human being living in an uncertain world that is really characterized by insecurity and things being messy and ungovernable, right? This is just the way it is. But we can react to living in that world in ways that create suffering, or we can relate to this inevitability of pain in ways that allow the heart to be released. And released to love, and to release to respond skillfully, nimbly, creatively, to do what we can do, to take care of each other, take care of our life. This is what Joseph Goldstein writes about this sutta that I just read a few minutes ago. We have all taken birth, we all experience suffering. When faith is born out of that suffering rather than bewilderment or despair, it sets in motion a chain of dependent arisings leading through many kinds of happiness all the way to final liberation. There are so many stories from the Buddhist time up until the present illustrating this possibility. And he goes on, this is from his book One Dharma, and he goes on and he mentions something from the Gata, which is a collection of the early poems from the early Buddhist nuns, awakening poems from the early Buddhist nuns. And one that he mentions here in this collection, where the Buddhist nun from the time of the Buddha says, "It's been 25 years since I went forth. Not even for the duration of a snap of the fingers have I obtained stillness of mind." Right? Some of us feel the same way. Yeah, I've been practicing for 30 years, or I've been, and I don't get that samadhi, that concentration. And then a little later in this poem, it goes, "Drenched with desire for sensual pleasures, holding out my arms, crying out, I entered the monastery." And then the poem goes on, she talks about hearing the teachings, and this time, after 25 years, this time somehow the teachings landed, and the mind, the heart understood, right? And understood how to really show up and connect. And that's what we do, when we sit and meditate or do walking meditation practice, that ordinary exposure to unpleasantness is there, whether it's in the form of a painful memory, or it's in the form of being restless and wanting something more exciting to happen, like we're bored and we're thinking about a TV show we could watch, or food we could eat, or problem we could solve. Right, but there's so many of these opportunities to simply recognize, oh, this pain, this uneasiness of the heart is being known. And we can be right at that pivot point where we see all the various off-ramps, all the various habits to relate to this thing that's painful in the moment in a way that is the second arrow, that contributes to more suffering for myself and maybe others. Or to relate to what is painful, what is hard to be with, in a way that doesn't have any reverberations whatsoever. We might say to relate to it without grasping. Sometimes it's like this, so we feel some disappointment. We feel betrayal. We feel the pain of not being liked by somebody in the way that we want to be liked, or not treated by somebody in the way we want to be treated. And it has a particular Vedana, a particular feeling tone. And we can't avoid that feeling tone, but we can relate to the feeling tone, right? We can let it be what it is. It's that experience being known. And it's hard to, until we just give it a shot, it's hard to believe how transformative it is to really meet the experience of suffering head on with wisdom and kindness, to be humble, right? So we're not relating to the painful experience, whether it's just mildly painful or intensely painful, with preconceived ideas. Because just to be a little blunt about it, we have a lot of arrogant certainty in terms of our habit energies around what is painful, right? This sort of self-view about pain, mental pain, emotional pain, social pain, physical pain, existential pain, whatever the particular quality, it's like, you don't have to tell me, I know it's bad. I know, it's like we feel so obliged to resist it, to hate it, to want to blame, to sort of assign somebody blame for the fact that I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing. And all of those habits keep us from actually meeting the experience in the most direct and simple way. What is the experience of dukkha, of suffering? Ajahn Chah has this potent little teaching. Practice like this. If people want to talk a lot about theory, that's their business. But no matter how much it's debated, the practice always comes down to this single point right here. When something arises, it arises right here. Whether a lot or a little, it originates right here. When it ceases, the cessation is right here. Where else? The Buddha called this point the knowing. When it knows the way things are accurately in line with the truth, we'll understand the meaning of mind. Things incessantly deceive. As you study them, they're simultaneously deceiving you. How else can I put it? Even though you know about them, you're still being deluded by them, precisely where you know them. That's the situation. So this is a real act of courage, and I think a real act of faith to invest right here in our experience. Like, this is how we address the world we're living in. Doesn't mean we don't do other things to respond to what's going on around us in the world, what's happening to us and around us. But we also have to include this, we have to open to the possibility that what's really important is how we're relating to the experience. We think what's really important is how am I going to respond? But what's equally important, what really drives how we're going to respond, is how we understand what this is. And we don't emphasize that very much because we think we already know, like that our understanding is already the truth of the matter. So we don't actually take a close look when we're sad, when we're disappointed, when we're bored, when we're outraged, when we're, whatever experience we experience in life. What is this experience? So the delusion, the sort of misstep, is right here in the moment. And the resolution, like the cause for dukkha, real suffering, is right here. And the resolution of dukkha is right here. And we'd much rather pin it out there somewhere. It can be, it's, how it is in life. We don't really want, in some ways, giving up feels like an easy solution. Like when there's so much going on and we feel helpless sometimes, well, there's nothing I can do. People criticize, Dharma practice sometimes because they feel it's self-centered, like you should be doing this, you should be feeding the world, or you should be standing up to those who are causing harm, which makes a lot of sense to me. I think we should be doing those things. But we should also be assessing why do patterns of suffering, patterns of oppression, patterns of injustice, patterns of causing harm, why is there these repeating cycles? What is being missed here? And that's really where spiritual practice comes in, where we're taking a closer look. Here's another little teaching from Ajahn Chah that I think gives us some useful pointing out. So Ajahn Chah, this Thai Buddhist monk, wonderful meditation teacher who died in the 1990s, he said, "So the Buddha taught us to contemplate these wavering conditions of the mind. Whenever the mind moves, it becomes unstable and impermanent, unsatisfactory, and cannot be taken as a self. These are the three universal characteristics of all conditioned phenomena. The Buddha taught us to observe and contemplate these movements of mind." So in a way, we're practicing to align not with these natural processes unfolding, but to align with the knowing, right? So that we can see the change, the movements, without getting entangled with them. Buddha has a useful story, some of you know the sutta, the discourse on the heartwood, and the Buddha is talking about somebody who's in need of heartwood, the core of the tree where the wood is solid, but it's a deluded person, and they come back with twigs and branches, and so they can't really do what they wanted to do with the heartwood. And then, goes back out looking for heartwood and comes back with bark, and that doesn't work. And goes out looking for heartwood, comes back with sapwood. So finally figures it out, comes back with heartwood. And the Buddha uses this as a way of talking about spiritual materialism. Like, because we're suffering, I'd call it almost an instinct, our instinct to take care of ourselves. We're all trying really hard not to suffer. It's just that in trying really hard not to suffer, we do things that cause a lot of suffering. And that's really the way that we should analyze our own actions in the world and everybody else's actions. Everybody in the world is working really hard not to suffer. Even when we give up, that's just one strategy to not suffer, even though it doesn't work. Giving up causes more suffering, or hoarding, I want a lot of power, I want a lot of wealth, that causes me and others a lot of suffering. Or I want to destroy those things that feel threatening to me. I need to get rid of anything that could harm me. That causes a lot of suffering. So we're all doing what we think we should do to alleviate suffering, but it's not working. So it's really about understanding like this and in a way getting comfortable with like holding an aspiration, like to be human, to have this existence without the suffering. So we're not going to settle for what we really, when we're reflective, know isn't really helping. I notice this a lot. I like eating, like most of us humans. I like eating good food, tasty food. But it's just occurring to me, just that habit in the mind to want the lunch or to want the meal to be more than what it's actually going to be. Like to think that having this nice meal is going to be providing something that it can't provide. It's going to provide some gratification, but that experience of gratification is pretty ephemeral. I've had a lot of nice meals, but they haven't really satisfied me in any meaningful way. I still want a nice meal. There's an onwardness. But still, when it comes time before the next nice meal, there's this sense that, when I have that, it's really going to take care of me in some meaningful way. So with the simile of the heartwood, the Buddha says it's like we want to take care of our suffering, but when we get the branches and the twigs, it's like thinking that having status, being, belonging, having wealth, resources, like that's really an answer. And it isn't. And we'll be betrayed, and this happens over and over again, where people think having resources, having status, in all the ways that we seek it, belonging and in the ways that we want to belong, and we pursue those things, and they're meaningful to an extent. If they had no meaning, we wouldn't pursue them, right? So there's something to those kind of relatively superficial pursuit. But in the end, they don't give us what they seem to have promised, right? So then we look for something else. Well, I'll be a good person. So that's the coming back with the bark, and someone develops a lot of sila. Some of you know that Pali word for living with a lot of integrity around not harming, not causing harm. So in terms of our ethical conduct, what we take in the world, not taking things that haven't been wisely, rightly earned, not stealing, not taking more than our share, treating each other with respect, not causing harm, not killing, right, in terms of our choices that we make. And that's like, that's pretty significant. We do derive a lot of well-being from living a good life, but it doesn't really protect us ultimately, right? And then there's developing the ability to take care of our mind, to deeply concentrate the mind, experience the healing effects of samadhi, really that inner unification, the mind-heart gathering, and having a real vacation from the world, right? There's so much spiritual healing and emotional, psychological healing that happens when we develop the power of the mind, you could say. This is a big part of our practice because it really sensitizes us. It allows us to do insight practice or wisdom practice, this concentration. But the Buddhist says that's like gathering sapwood. It's not the heartwood, right? It won't take care of us in the end. And there are examples of this, like some of you know this character from the time of the Buddha, and sometimes referred to as the Buddha's evil cousin. Devadatta was his name. But he had a powerful talent for developing concentration, that, and even to the extent of psychic powers, his mind was able to get so concentrated, so sensitive, that he had these sort of amazing powers that people evidently sometimes are able to develop. But he was still capable of suffering and setting in motion a lot of suffering. He even tried to kill the Buddha because he wanted to take over the Sangha, the community of monks and nuns, because he was caught up in his own delusions of grandeur and, who knows what else, right? So it's really useful to develop the power of concentration, but it isn't liberating, right? And even deep insight, I should have mentioned the concentration was the inner bark, and the deep insight, knowledge and vision, that's called the sapwood, right? So even having insight but not finishing the practice is a setup. There are a lot of people, I put myself in this boat, of who've had deep insight, right? But the mind can take advantage of that understanding and develop, reestablish a sense of self as the one who understands, right? And then it's like you want to tell people, oh, this is how it is. It's just another way to suffer. It's really good to have deep insight, but we want to use deep insight to sort of double down on the practice, to be more interested, more open, following this natural process, or giving ourselves to this natural process of awakening. So it's only the unshakable release of the heart. That's the heartwood in this simile, right? That is, with the heart. So it's like, and this is something one of my teachers would repeat all the time, Sayadaw Tejaniya. He would say this in such a sincere way, that when people have real progress in their practice, he would really try to get into them not to stop because you've had some real progress in your practice, right? You really have transformed your life, but you're not done. You're still in the realm of being able to really suffer and to cause suffering for other people. And we see this, having been in the middle of spiritual communities for the last 40 years in various ways. I see this a lot where people come to like a meditation center because they're really suffering and they're looking for help. And it's a good place to look for help. And they dig in and they get the help, and some of the obvious suffering in their life gets transformed and their life is working better. And what do we do when that happens? We sometimes stop practicing because life is working so much better. And it's like we took our medicine, we got our cure, we think, and we go about our life and we let go of what was working so well for us. And then sometimes, people like myself who've been around long enough, we'll see people cycle back in. So maybe they haven't been around for 5 or even more years, and then they come back and they realize there's more to do. I'm not done. I need this practice. So it's really good to not get confused when our life starts to work better because, we've learned a thing or two. We've learned how to do the worldly game, like how to get along, how to get ahead, how to jump through the worldly hoops that you need to jump through. But we're not satisfied, we're not gratified with that. We realize the heart is still vulnerable. And then we realize, I'm going to develop my ethical conduct. I'm going to be a really good person. I'm going to treat each person with respect. I'm going to share what I have, not take more than what I need. I'm going to live a moral life. And we feel even more stable, more clear, more safe, but still capable of suffering, right? And we stick with it. Okay, I'm going to develop my heart. I'm going to really develop the capacity of my heart to be present in a stable and continuous way. And I'm going to feel all the benefits of that without getting confused. In our practice, we call this, what is the phrase? Something about perversions of insight, or do you remember what that phrase is, Wynn? Oh, corruptions of insight. Thanks, Wynn is here. Yeah, corruptions of insight, where in practice where we start having deeper states of concentration and the bliss, the brightness of mind, the deep ease and contentment in the heart, the wonderful feeling, the pervasive feeling of tranquility in the body and mind. And we get confused by how healing, how beautiful some of these meditative experiences can be, right? And they're called corruptions of insight, where we, basically take an off-ramp because we stop practicing, and every time we do practice, it becomes this egoic thing, like, I want more of that. How can I get back to that nice experience? And of course, it doesn't work, and eventually, we start getting frustrated with our practice because the greed of wanting those nice experiences is not the cause for having deeper and deeper experiences. And I think the thing I really want to leave us with before I open it for conversation tonight is just this, humility around our experience of dukkha. And again, don't necessarily begin with the most extreme places in your life where the heart really hurts, but just the ordinary ouches, emotional, spiritual, physical ouches in our life, places of pain, and just to see if we can manifest some actual curiosity and use that way we did it in practiced in the guided meditation. Like, what is the mind knowing? And then we're knowing that the mind is knowing this, right? So the mind is conscious of the experience of suffering, and we're knowing that. We're knowing that sensitivity to the ouch. It's an experience that's being known. And in that, and seeing it in that way as something being known, we're stripping away so much that habit just adds to the experience of suffering. When we understand it in this very profoundly simple way, it's this squeeze that's being known. So think about a moment that you felt some shame or embarrassment. So what is that experience? Not your interpretation of that experience, but what is the felt sense of a moment of embarrassment? Well, it hurts like this. Okay, so that hurting, that's something, that's an experience being known. And to really attune to that simple level of the experiencing, it's this ouch being known, this heaviness being known, this squeeze being known. Not even known by me, because that's not my experience, actually. My experience is there's the squeeze or the heaviness or the ache and the knowing of it. And I can't even separate the knowing from the ache. I just know that there is a knowing and there is an ache. That's all I know. That's all there is. And somehow, if we do that repeatedly, if we really build that confidence that that's a relevant thing, a relevant way to be relating to our personal experience of suffering, we'll learn something about the experience of suffering that we haven't learned before. What we really need to do is break the spell that we already know what the experience of suffering is. It's hard to take a fresh look without the opening being corrupted or distorted by our preconceived ideas of the experience. So I'll leave it here. We have about 15 minutes, maybe a little bit less, to hear from some people. And maybe the general theme, of course, anything goes, any questions about practice are always appropriate, but the particular theme might be, in our many years of being a human being, what have we learned about the experience of suffering? How to be close, how to open, and what has that taught us? How has our relationship to pain gotten transformed in our life? How did we used to relate to pain, difficulty, challenges? How has that been transformed over the years of living and generally, and more specifically, over the years of our practice? Yeah, or anything that comes to mind. Always appreciate people's willingness to share. I am recording tonight, but the audio will get recorded, but your video won't get recorded. And you can just go ahead and unmute yourself. Always nice to share your first name. Feel free to also share your pronouns if you want, maybe where you're coming from. Who would like to get us started?
I can start. Hi, my name is Erica, and I'm in St. Paul. And I just have been really interested the last 2 days in a change in how I was relating to experience of a lot of uncertainty in my life, including around a medical or health related issue. And the uncertainty was just provoking a lot of anxiety, which was just so much suffering. And then um, just yesterday or the day before, I had I think my mind just became so aware of, perhaps after our Sunday conversation a bit, the intensity of to which I was creating this suffering, that I had this realization that um, the suffering was really optional, and I could let go, or let that just consuming anxiety, I could let it be. It could just be there, but it didn't need to consume my mind in the same way. And it's just been this very, very interesting experience to watch how that could just settle and still exist in my awareness, but not be consuming. And yeah, how I was relating to that anxiety and even calling it to mind, I think, and bringing it to the fore, which then my mind was just, spinning around, and how just seeing that allowed it to drop away, not go away. It's still an awareness, but just not create the kind of suffering and entanglement that I had been experiencing. So it's just been a very interesting learning experience for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that testimonial, Erica. And it's like a perfect example, like getting to know suffering was the cause for a significant release. And I'm guessing, you didn't mention this directly, but I'm guessing faith has been born from that experience. Like faith, like you said, that suffering actually may be optional. And that will just naturally feed that natural process. The next time strong suffering arises, there's going to be a quality of interest that wasn't there a year ago because of this kind of clear experience, or this deepening of insight, I'd call it. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Go ahead, Richard.
Uh, Richard from Minneapolis. Uh, yeah, the past 3 years have been a lot of pain relating to my daughter. And uh, I've noticed that I go back in time and I try to um, understand why this occurred and try to change the events or what I could have done differently, get on that treadmill. And as of but recently, the needle is just starting to move a bit, and I'm getting a modicum or a little bit of peace. And part of that is because there's a choice not to get on that treadmill, to go back and try to fix everything. Um, but it also is the choice of really embracing the pain and looking at it and trying not to sort it out. Just feel it and experience it, and that seems to be helping, and then staying within my practice. It, 30 minutes a day really helps sort those feelings or clarify, and they dissipate. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. That's powerful to hear. Really happy about that learning because it matters. Yeah, who'd like to go next? We have a couple minutes left. Be nice to hear from a couple more folks. These testimonials are very powerful. And of course, any questions also totally appropriate.
My name is Mamie. Sometimes I'm experiencing dukkha right now. And I think it's tragic when it wants to. So I sometimes I imagine that it's like a candle, like what like suffering is and pain when it's pure in its source. It's like a candle that's contained, or like a bonfire it's contained. And it's so tragic when it becomes a wildfire and it like reaches out and grabs out, because its intentions are so pure, like it just wants relief. And like I think for me personally, sometimes it's like this feeling of like, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to relieve the suffering. Help. It's like it's so tragic. It'll break your heart because the intention is so pure. It's just like reaching out, but then it just spreads. But also that beautiful source, when it doesn't have the shoulds around it, or like the self, when we're not so hard on ourselves, this like this bonfire, this like candle of suffering is sort of beautiful, and makes you actually feel more connected to the suffering of the world. And it's sort of sacred. And it's the place where like blues songs are written, it can be very soulful and liberating. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mamie. What you said reminds me of that line from Sharon Salzberg's book that suffering, she wrote, suffering isn't redemptive. Opening to suffering is redemptive. There's something sacred, like Mamie was saying, about realizing our heart's capacity to be right in the middle. I mean, Richard said something similar too, like just that exploration. Is there a heart? Is there an understanding that actually allows us to be close? Because if we're otherwise, there's part of this natural process is that when my heart is really hurting, there's just this natural pattern of wanting to cause hurt when we're really hurting. That's a bit, as I understood Mamie's image of the wildfire, it's sort of like our response is feeding the sort of destructiveness of the pain, just on the onwardness of it. But there's something about keeping open to our capacity to actually feel. Doesn't mean we're there yet, right? But to stay open to the possibility that with enough supports, we can be right in the middle of feeling what we're feeling. You know, the immensity of grief that we sometimes feel as human beings, the immensity of betrayal that we feel sometimes as human beings, or disappointment, or all those sort of, you know, emotions that we're vulnerable to as a human. Maybe there's a capacity, so we don't have to manage or control, but we can actually meet them with wisdom and kindness, and the response can come from that that place of not being afraid of how big feeling can be. Any last comment before we say goodnight? Some short sharing, if there is any. We'll really appreciate people showing up. Always nice to gather on Tuesday night. I'll just mention, as always, we'll have our New Year's Eve celebration, both on Zoom and in person at the center in Minneapolis. And Ellis, a wonderful singer-songwriter, will be performing, as Ellis has done for, about 20 years now. And she is definitely worth hearing. And we'll have some reflections. Wynn Fricke will be there. I'll be there on Zoom. Shelley will be there. Shelley Graff, the other guiding teacher. So join in if you'd like to be part of a spiritual community on New Year's Eve. And you can get more details on our calendar. And check out our new website that just came online maybe about a month ago now. So a lot of people worked on that for a long time. Feel free to unmute yourself to say goodnight if you want.
Thank you, Mark.
Night. Good night, all.